all of tonight has been dedicated to talking about this wonderful and mystical world beyond. And honestly, it sounds pretty awesome. But the number one question that I think we all have now is, how do we access this world beyond? Because, like I said, it's pretty awesome. Well, I think I have the solution to that. So, like we said, my name is Beatrice Duchastel, and I'm a junior at Ingmore High School. So when I learned that the theme was World Beyond, my mind immediately went to this quote. And this is a quote that I see every single weekend. I really adore this quote because I feel that it truly encompasses the most defining aspect of humanity. We are really curious creatures that are always looking for more. More knowledge, more opportunity, more joy, more money, more. Humans are always looking for what could be next. They are always looking for that world beyond. I also mentioned that I see this quote every single weekend. That's because it hangs proudly above the opening to the science fiction exhibit at the Museum of Pop Culture in Seattle, where I volunteer on Saturdays. I love museums. I do. I'm that person who will spend an hour in each exhibit, a day in each museum. I'm that person that reads every single note, every single placard of every single artifact. But I really do just love museums, and that's really what I want to talk to you all about today. Museums. I truly believe that museums are how humans experience the world beyond. First, I kind of want to get a general reading of the room. Who here would say that they also love museums? Okay, that's a really good amount. Who here is maybe a little bit skeptical? Not as much. You can admit it. Okay, I see a few hands. I'm gonna try to change your minds. Okay? Awesome. The question you probably all have is, how do museums allow us to access the world beyond? Well, who here wants to travel the world? Yeah, and who here actually has? Not as many. To all of you who want to truly travel the world, go to a museum. Take, for example, the British Museum in London. There are around 8 million artifacts. Those 8 million artifacts come from 8 million places and represent 8 million different perspectives. But you get to visit and experience them all in one building. I think that's pretty cool. These are some of my favorites up on the screen. And might I add, when we visit museums, we're not just traveling through space, we're also traveling through time, which is something that no airline can provide, but museums can. When we view all of these artifacts, we can begin to imagine what life might be like in that place that was previously halfway across the world, but is now suddenly right in front of your eyes in this object. You can begin to imagine the ways of life of those people in that place and time, and you can begin to imagine a world beyond your own experience. I hear you saying, well, that's good and all, but you tricked me. That's just using your imagination. I want to go there. And to that I have to say, hold on. It's only about 4 minutes in, I got a little bit more time. Some museums are much more interactive and they will actually take you there. They don't just let you imagine the world beyond, they will bring you to it. One example of this is a personal favorite of mine, and that is the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. There they house the largest collection of international espionage artifacts that are on public display, which, if you love James Bond movies as much as I do, is pretty awesome. But the one thing I really want to talk to you about is this thing called Operation Spy. And that's a 1-hour simulation that they run where you dress up in a disguise, follow clues, solve puzzles, and ultimately save the world. In a society where the likelihood of all or even any of us becoming spies is basically non-existent, this kind of simulation shows us an opportunity that would otherwise be completely inaccessible. Museums are masters of making inaccessible things very close to home. The chance that you walk into a building and say an Andy Warhol print or a Venetian Renaissance plate or or even a page from a 9th century Quran is just hanging on the wall is not very likely. But if that building happens to be a museum, then they have this magical ability to have the necessary verification and authority to house that work. They are able to make the inaccessible appear right in front of your eyes. It may seem very odd to match that word accessible with the realm of museums. While I have really touted the wonders of museums and anthropology and art, I also have to acknowledge the incredible elitism and oppression that those fields have had since their very creation. One of the first museums was Donnas Museum, dating from 530 BC, and it was founded by Princess Enegaldi of the Babylonians. She would collect and curate ancient Mesopotamian artifacts, as well as label them in her private collection. Keyword, private. In fact, all early museums were simply private collections that wealthy individuals would curate for themselves. The world beyond was not given access to by the common person. And this displays one of the first issues of accessibility in museums. Not everyone is allowed in. Some people are turned away. There are several other issues as well. The fact that many artifacts in that truly wonderful British museum were stolen from countries and regions without any consideration given to the rights of the native people to have autonomy over their own cultural heritage. The fact that even now, 84% of museum curators and 93% of museum board directors are white will have the tendency of choosing white artists and white artifacts over those created by people of color. The fact that it is nearly impossible to start a museum without an exorbitant amount of money or funding, meaning it will be necessary to find a wealthy sponsor and display artifacts that represent their perspective and not what you want to show. This is incredibly disheartening to hear as someone who wants to go into this field, that you're coming into this field that has this legacy of being elitist and oppressive. But in fact, it can be incredibly inspiring because I get to be part of the generation that can help right some of these wrongs. But the main question is, how do we do that? Well, the answer is that we need to change our definition of what a museum is. As I said before, museums are the world beyond. They are a way to experience something outside of ourselves by presenting artifacts and objects that represent vastly different perspectives, yet still all relate to the human experience. But does that necessarily mean what we think it means? Well, let's build a museum. Here's a building, and at least something to store it in. Let's add some artifacts there, and finally let's call it something. Give it an identity so people know what it is. And there, that's a museum. When we distill it down to these basics, museums are not as strictly defined as we thought they were. Here's a fun example we could play around with. When I visited the Getty Museum in Los Angeles last year, they had on display some wonderful furniture from the Rococo period in France, displayed like a bedroom, a little bit like on the wall behind me. And that got me thinking, I think I might have a museum of my own, and I didn't even know it. So I present to you all the Museum of Beatrice, also known as my bedroom. It's a picture of it. I did clean it right before this. So let's dissect this. Can my bedroom be considered a museum? Well, let's see. 1, does it show a strict perspective or way of life? And I would say yes. 2, does it hold artifacts that will yield fruitful analysis? I think yes as well. If we look at this, we can analyze attitudes I hold that have been reinforced by society. As an example, if you look at the sign posters on the left of drama production that I have participated in, that shows that I have achievements that I've been taught to proudly display, and that shows a certain cultural attitude. And finally, does this have a connection to the human experience? And I would say yes to that as well, because I am a human and I live in there and I shape it to have my own experience. Logically, by answering these questions, it makes sense for me to think of this as a museum. In fact, it's a hugely accessible museum, at least on the curatorial side. It is self-curated by me, but think of how easy it has been to fill your bedroom with stuff. Think of how many museum curators we have sitting in this room right now who don't even know it. But why is this not considered a museum? If I were to set up shop, open the door of my bedroom to the public, why would no one come? To me, the two main differences between my museum and the lovely French room at the Getty, aside from the vastly superior budget they held, are the fact that my museum does not have an open presentation, and my museum is not being preserved. To address the first point, my museum is more along the lines of those elitist private galleries. While it may be accessible on the curatorial side, it is private, and unfortunately, I don't think I will be opening it up to the public anytime soon. To address the second, my bedroom will not stay like this forever. I will go to college, take stuff out, eventually my younger brother will also leave the nest, and my parents will probably sell the house, which means bye-bye bedroom museum. The fact is, these artifacts do not have a curatorial team working around the clock to ensure preservation. So, in order to find our truly accessible museum of the future, we need to find something that is accessible on both sides, meaning self-curated and open to the public, something that is being preserved, and of course, we are looking for the world beyond, that outside experience communicated to us through various artifacts. And once again, like every other TED Talk on the planet, technology solves our issues. Now, this is going to be sounding a little bit radical, but what if social media is the solution to this museum accessibility problem? Technology has affected our world in so many ways, why not the world of museums? Let's take, for example, Instagram. An account would be a museum, with each post an artifact. Each account tells us of a new perspective through visual elements. Each museum has a name. They are all self-curated and they are public as they are put on the web. Additionally, since they are put on the web, they are also preserved. They will be there perhaps long after their owners are gone. You can replace Instagram with many different forms of social media, such as Facebook or YouTube or Pinterest. To me at least, these are some of the most accessible museums out there. The whole point of museums is the power of knowledge that we can gain from the presentation and interaction of artifacts that help shape our cultural understanding of the human experience. Who says that has to be in a brick and mortar building? Who says that there aren't a million worlds beyond sitting right there in your pocket? In fact, I'm not the first person to have thought of this. Artist Guthrie Lonergan created an art piece called MySpace Intro Playlist in 2006. It's just what it seems. A playlist on YouTube of MySpace intro videos. And while it seems like such a trivial thing, they're so revealing of the time that we live in and the human culture that surrounds that time period, meaning that they make the perfect historical artifact for future generations to hold. So often we think of museums as being the past. Museums collect relics of the past. They were founded in the past, they present the past. Yet in essence, museums are simply reflections of our human culture. And our human culture is constantly evolving. While museums may be grounded in the past, museums have a future as well. And I can't wait to help create that future. Thank you very much.